Jai Shripada Paramahamsa, Hare Radha Saja Stotra Satya, Sri Srimad, His Divine Grace, Sirabai Charan Narvind Bhakti Vedanta Swami, Sri Prabhupada Ki, Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki, Abhiditi, Founder Acharyas, Divine Grace of Prabhupada Ki, Namacharya Sri Haridas Thakur Ki, Samabhata Bhakta Vrinda Ki, Harinam Sankirtan Ki, Antarashtra Bhagavatam Ki, Jai Nitai Gaur Pimanande, all that is to be assembled devotees, all that is to be assembled devotees, all that is to be assembled devotees, all that is to Sri Guru, to Sri Gauranga, all that is to Sri Prabhupada. Om Agyan Tirandasya Gyananjana Sarakaya Lakshurindrikam Jena Tasmai Sri Gurave Namaha Sri Chaitanya Manobhistam Stapitam Jena Bhutale Vayam Rupa Kadamahyam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Sri Guru Sri Juta Padakam Sri Gurun Vaishnavam Sya Sri Rupam Sagragatam Sahagana Raghunatam Vitam Swam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Paritana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Sri Radha Krishna Padam Sahagana Lalita Sri Visakambitam Hare Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopisha Gopisha Kanta Radha Kanta Namaste Tapta Kanchana Gourangi Radhe Vrindavadeshwari Vishahanu Sudhiri Pranamami Vanchakalpa Tarubhyascha Kripa Sindhu Gyaivacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Narayanam Namaskritya Brahmacharya Narotamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Jayam Before reciting the Srimad Bhagavatam, which is a very means of conquest, let us first offer respectful obeisance to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and to Nana Narayan Rishi, the Super Being, and to Mother Saraswati, the Goddess of Learning, and unto Sri Radha, the author. Nastate Savadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavati Tamashloke Bhaktir Bhartinashiki by regularly hearing the Srimad Bhagavatam and by rendering service unto the pure devotee, all that is troublesome within the heart becomes destroyed and practically nil. And by the devotional service unto the Supreme Lord, whose praise with transcendental songs becomes established as an irrevocable fact. Idam Bhagavatam Nama Idam Brahma Samhitam Pratama Shloka Charitam Chakana Bhagavan Rishi Yishreyasaya Lokasya Dhanyam Swasya Namahat. This Srimad Bhagavatam, known as the Grantaraj, is a king of all Vedic literatures, is the literary incarnation of God. It is compiled by the incarnation of God, the Srila Bhagavatam. It is meant for the ultimate good of all people. It is all successful, all blissful, and all perfect. Sri Krishna Chaitanya, Prabhu Nityananda, Sri Advaita Gadadhar, Sri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Hare Hare, Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya, 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 Om Sradhyay Namaha, Om Sradhyay Namaha, Om Sradhyay Namaha, Yukam Karoti Rataram Pangum Langayate Girim Yatripa Tamaham Bande Sri Guru Dinadharanam Yatripa Tamaham Bande Sri Guru Dinadharanam. Hare Krishna. Welcome to our Bhagavatam class. We have started a new section from a new chapter actually from the 11th canto. Chapter 3 entitled Liberation from the Illusory Energy. Text 4, huh? Yes, sir. Text 4, text number 4. Evam Sristani Bhutani Ravistaha Pancha Dhatuvihi Ekadaha Dashadatmanam Vibhajan Jusate Gunan. We did this one. Yeah. So 5. We'll do 5. Yeah, that's number 5. Gunayara Gunan Sa Gunjana Atma Prajotitai Prabhu Manyamana Idam Kristam Atmanam Iha Sajate Gunayana Gunam Sabhunna Jana Atma Prajotitai Prabhu Manyamana idam sistam atmanam iha sajjate gunam savunna jana atma prajyotitai prabhu. Manyamana idam sristam atmanam iha sajjate Gunayara gunanna sabunna jana Atma pradyotitai prabhu Manyamana idam sristam atmanam iha sajjate
गुणान् सबुञ्जाना आत्मप्रद्योतितैः प्रभो मन्यमान इदं सृष्टम् आत्मानं इह सज्जते
गुणैर्गुणा सबुज्ञाना आत्मा प्रद्योतितैः प्रभु मन्यमाना इदं सृष्टम् आत्मानं इह सज्जते
गुणैर्गुणान् सबुञ्जाना आत्मा प्रद्योतितैः प्रभुः मन्यमाना इदं सृष्टम् आत्मा सज्जते गुणैर्गुणान् सबुञ्जाना आत्मा प्रद्योतितैः प्रभुः मन्यमाना इदं सृष्टम् आत्मानं सज्जते गुणानां सबुञ्जानां आत्मप्रद्योतितैः प्रभुः मन्यमाना इदं सृष्टम् आत्मानं सज्जते
Gunai with the modes, the senses. Gunam, the modes, the objects of the senses. Saha, he, the individual living being. Kunjana, enjoying. Atma, by the Supreme Lord. Prajotitai, enlivened. Prabhu, the Master. Manyamana, thinking. Idam, this. Sristam, created body. Atmanam, as his own self. Iha, in this. Subjate, he becomes entangled. Translation purport by disciples of the Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki. The individual living being, the master of the material body, uses his material senses, which have been activated by the supersoul, to try to enjoy sense objects composed of the three modes of nature. Thus, he misidentifies the created material body with the unborn eternal self and becomes entangled in the illusory energy of the Lord. And repeat after me. The individual living being the master of the material body, uses his material senses, which have been activated by the supersoul, to try to enjoy sense objects, compose the three modes of nature. Thus he misidentifies the created material body with the unborn eternal self and becomes entangled in the illusory energy of Lord. Important. In this verse, the living entity is called Prabhu, or master, because he is a minute part and parcel of the Supreme Master Krishna. Similarly, in Bhagavad Gita 15:8, the Lord has described the living entity as Ishvaraha, the controller. Sariram yad avapnoti yaschapyut kramatishvaraha jehit vaidani samyati vayura gandham ivashayat. Translation: the living entity in the material world carries his various conceptions of life from one body to another, as the air carries aromas. Srila Prabhupada has commented in his purport, quote, here the living entity is described as Ishvaraha, the controller of his own body. If he likes, he can change his body to a higher grade, and if he likes, he can move to a lower class. Minute independence is there. The change his body undergoes depends upon him. End of the quote. This statement confirms the words Samatra and Atma Prasiddhi in text 3 of this chapter. If the Supreme Lord were to interfere with the minute independence of the living entity, there would be no question of the living entities engaging in the loving service of the Lord, since love implies a spontaneous free choice by the lover. Here the word Prabhu indicates that just as a child, having received a toy car from his father, pedals on the sidewalk imitating the father who drives an actual car, the living entity pedals around the material universe and the innumerable material bodies selected for him by the Supreme Lord from an assortment of 8,400,000 species. Thus, the living entity, infatuated with the false ego of the material body, creates a fearful situation in which he undergoes repeated birth and death, as described in the statement Bhayam Vritiya Bhimni Veshatah Syat, Bhagavatam 11:2-37. Srila Jiva Goswami has given another explanation for this verse. If the word Prabhu is taken to mean the Supreme Lord, the word Gunai can be understood to mean good qualities, since Guna can refer to the material modes of nature or the admirable qualities, as in the verse, Yashasti Bhaktir Bhagavati Akinshana Sarvair Gunaistatra Samasate Suraha. This verse would then mean that the Lord, by his transcendental qualities, Gunai, such as mercy, is able to relish the transcendental qualities, Gunam, of his pure devotees. Atma Pratyoditai would then indicate that by surrendering unto the Lord, who is the reservoir of all good qualities, the pure devotees become similarly endowed with good qualities. The word Manyamana idam sristam atmanam would indicate that the Lord accepts the body of his pure devotee to be on the same spiritual level as he himself, as indicated in the verse, Acharyam mam vijaniyam navamanyeta kalhichit. The Lord is attracted by the loving devotional service of his pure devotees, and thus becomes entangled in the network of their loving relationship with him. For example, after the battle of Kurukshetra, when Krishna was leaving for his own city, Dwarka, the loving appeal of Maharaj Yudhisthira forced the Lord to remain for several more weeks in Hastinapur. Similarly, when the elderly gopis of Vrindavan clapped their hands, Krishna would dance like a puppet, keeping time to their rhythm. In relation to this subject matter, Srila Jiva Goswami has quoted a verse from Srimad Bhagavatm, 9th Canto, chapter 468. Sadhavo hridayam mahyam sadhunam hridayam tvaham
Sadhunam hridayam
mat anyat te na jananti naham tebhyo manab afi. Translation: the pure devotee is always within the core of my heart, and I am always in the heart of the pure devotee. My devotees do not know anything but me, and I do not know anyone but them. End of quotation. According to Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, the word Prabhu may also be understood as follows. The word pra indicates prakarshena, or excessively, and bhu indicates bhavati, or taking birth. Thus, prabhu indicates prakarshena deva tiryag adishu bhavatiti saha, or repeatedly taking birth among the demigods, animals, human beings, and other forms of life. Confirming the statement by Srila Jiva Goswami concerning the Lord's attachment to the spiritualized body of a pure devotee, Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur has quoted the following verses from Chaitanya Charitamrita, Antarita 4, 192 and 193. Diksha Kale Bhakta Kode Atma Samarpanam Se Kale Krishna Kare Kare Atma Sama. Translation: at the time of initiation, when a devotee fully surrenders unto the service of the Lord, Krishna accepts him to be as good as himself. In text 93, Se deha pare tara chit ananda maya aprakrita dehi kanga sarana bhajaya. Translation: when the devotee's body is thus transformed into spiritual existence, the devotee in that transcendental body renders service to the lotus feet of the Lord. Translation again: the individual living being, the master of the material body, uses his material senses, which have been activated by the supersoul, to try to enjoy sense objects composed of the three modes of nature. Thus, he misidentifies the created material body with the unborn eternal self and becomes entangled in the illusory energy of the Lord. So the title of this chapter, as we mentioned earlier, is Liberation from the Illusory Energy. Actually, in the Bhagavad Gita, we find expressions like master of, what is that expression? Yeah, Kshitra. Kshitra, this body is Kshitra, means field of activity. So there is Kshitra, the material body, and then there is Kshitragya. Kshitragya, yeah. Prabhupada gave that name to one of his disciples, Kshitragya, who used to be in Calcutta many years ago. Kshitragya, transcendental knowledge means actually to understand the difference between the Kshitra, the field of activity, that means the material body, and the knower of the field of activity, Kshitragya. Also, Prabhupada explains how living entity can be either qualified or known as as master of the senses or servant of the senses. What is servant of the senses? Godas. Godas or Goswami. Yeah. These senses are the prominent features of the material body, and one who is in knowledge can actually learn to properly control or utilize the senses, beginning, of course, with the mind. The body is composed of both gross and some subtle senses, as we know. So it's interesting how in this section of the Bhagavatam especially, there are many references to the previous acharyas, Srila Jiva Goswami, Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur. We have many such very qualified, highly qualified personalities who are well versed, of course, in the science of bhakti and well versed in Sanskrit as well. So when one is knowing Sanskrit and knowing this transcendental knowledge, the essence of which is bhakti, then one can, as we are seeing in this purport, one can derive different explanation or understanding of what is being presented here. This is also touching on what is described in a very important book, small book, but very significant, given or written by one of our foremost acharyas, Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, entitled Dasamula Tattva. Actually, in our Vaishnava philosophy, the subject matter of Tattva is very much spoken about, and it is actually the core of our Vaishnava understanding of what the material world is about and what the spiritual world is about. So in this Dasamula Tattva by Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, as is being referred to here in the verse, in the purport rather, the preliminary understanding and essential, what is very essential for us to understand, is in reference to three levels of knowledge that we hear about, of course, because it is primarily given and explained by Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Our whole philosophy is actually contained within these three concepts, and they're known as Sambandha, Abhideya, and Prayojana, isn't it? When we nicely understand these principles, we can actually learn to apply them practically in any situation of life. And of these 10 principles, rather, seven of those principles deal with the subject matter of Sambandha. Sambandha has to do with both identity and relationship. And this is, of course, a main theme or main topic in our Vaishnava Sampradaya, in our Vaishnava philosophy, which has especially been elaborated upon by actually by all of the Goswamis, but especially by Srila Jiva Goswami. Srila Jiva Goswami, in terms of philosophy, is actually the topmost philosopher in our Vaishnava Sampradaya, even amongst the 6 Goswamis of Vrindavan. And therefore, to this day, his masterpiece called the Sat Sandarbhas are still extremely relevant. And Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur used to say that when the world will come to know, when people of the world will begin to understand the content of these literatures, referring to books like Sat Sandarbha, Dasa Mula Tattva, and of course, this is all referred to and explained in the Srimad Bhagavatam. It means that when the world will begin to understand the content of these literatures, especially the Srimad Bhagavatam, then and only then will major changes actually take place in the world. Major changes being that people, as referred to here in the verse, will not misidentify themselves as being this body, but will actually, based on knowledge, properly utilize his body in the service of Krishna. A nice point being made here by the various references from our different Vaishnava acharyas, and that is one of the tattvas that is mentioned actually in the Dasamur tattva. The living entity, there are actually four tattvas. The Dasamur tattva describes among the 7 tattvas that refer to Sambandha. 3 of them are related to Krishna, and 4 of them are related to the jiva. And it is foundational to us, to our philosophy, to know, to understand these 4 principles. So the one that is being referred to here is in reference to the jiva, living entity. As Krishna explained in the Bhagavad Gita, the jiva, of course, is amsha. Mamai vangsho jiva loke jiva bhuta sanatana. Verse well known by all devotees. Living entity is the eternal part and parcel. That means that eternally we are that small part and parcel of the Lord, and we remain eternally so, whether in our conditioned state in the material world or in our liberated state. That's why living entity is also referred to as prakriti. There are 2 levels of prakriti, as nicely described in the Bhagavad Gita: the para prakriti, the living entity, and the apara prakriti, material energy. So what is nicely explained here is how when the living entity is fortunate to come in contact with this knowledge, cultivates transcendental knowledge, understands more and more his original spiritual nature, then when that living entity reaches a certain level of transcendence, of transcendental realization, then the Lord actually the Lord interacts. The Lord begins to interact in ways which are, some examples are given here, in ways which are inconceivable. He sometimes accepts to become even subordinate, although he is never subordinate by nature, but he accepts to become subordinate, as we see in the pastimes of Vrindavan. So the first of the 4 aspects of the jiva is that he is amsha. The second is that he is in the material world known as conditioned, baddha jiv. The third position or quality is that although he is baddha jiv, controlled by the modes of material nature, if he is fortunate to come in contact with devotees and with the process of bhakti, then he can become mukta jiv, liberated soul, even within the material world. And we have, of course, many wonderful examples in our Vaishnava literatures of such personalities. And the 4th one, which is connected with what is being explained here, is that the jiva, living entity, is simultaneously Veda, Aveda, which is a very essential aspect of our philosophy, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's philosophy of Achinta Veda Veda Tattva. We are simultaneously different in quantity, but the same in quality. Different in quantity because we are eternally amsha, we are eternally servant. We may, at times, as referred to in the purport, we may be taking on false roles of Ishvara in the material world, but our eternal position, as nicely many times reiterated by Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, is Das Amidas Amidas Amidas, servant of the servant of the servant. So we can only begin to understand the very profound significance of this philosophy by hearing from the Shastra and by hearing especially from those who are well versed in the subject matter, means our Vaishnava acharyas, and therefore this is the recommended process, which is stressed again and again, actually throughout the Vedic literatures, the importance of the sadhu sangha by association of saintly persons. Then we can begin to understand the subject matters, which are actually the subject matters are varied. They are many, and they are also very, very deep and profound. And therefore, as we recite every day also, Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya, we need to Nityam, always, for what explains, it means daily. We need to daily give time for oral reception of the messages of the Bhagavatam. And therefore the importance, of course, not only for us to read and to hear from the Bhagavatam, but also the importance for us, and it's an important aspect, especially of the mission of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, to make that knowledge available to as many living entities as possible. The more we are holding classes on the Bhagavatam, the more we have discussions on the subject matters of the Bhagavatam, the more we glorify the various personalities who are described in the Bhagavatam, especially the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna, and his so many associates, the devotees, pure devotees. Then the more, of course, we become purified, the more the atmosphere also becomes purified. And in this way, it's an ongoing transformation, we could say, that is taking place both within ourselves. Krishna consciousness means an ongoing, ever-increasing transformation internally on the one side, and simultaneously, the more individuals engage in such activities, especially in the matter of inducing, inviting, encouraging others to take up the process, then it means that the whole atmosphere, which, as we all know, in Kali Yuga is extremely polluted, becomes therefore gradually more and more purified. And that is why, actually, I don't know if any of you have heard, there are a few lectures that are published that one can hear of Srila Prabhupada giving a class when there's no one in the class. and I don't think there are many, but there are some. Even the fact that there's only one, I think there's more than one, But Prabhupada would, I'm sure you have heard him explain how his Guru Maharaj, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, and I think Prabhupada took that literally, had said that even if there's no one, you speak, the four walls will hear, because there's all kinds of living entities uh, that are there that we can't possibly even see. But living entities are everywhere, isn't it? And of course, nowadays, because we use all kinds of chemicals, we find less such living entities in our, like ants and whatnot. But when we go to villages, so many living entities are there. I was just yesterday, our devotees from Indonesia, it was very interesting. They shared one recent small documentary that they made because this year, 1973, 2000, 2023, they're actually celebrating their 40th anniversary of installing the first Radha Krishna deities installed actually in the whole country of Indonesia. Yeah, the worship Sri Radha Govinda. And they made a very wonderful documentary going back to the very early days, taking out pictures. I just got it yesterday. There were a few small corrections which I made, and I'll be sharing it later on today. We can only do so many things in one day. But anyways, one of the devotees there were 5 devotees, especially in the beginning, because actually the activities in Indonesia started way back in 1979, actually. And but the Radha Krishna deities came a little later. There's a whole nice story about that, which I won't tell you because you won't want to look at the video. But it took a while. First, they were in Jakarta in different places. They had rented some place, and initially they only had pictures on the altar. Then at one point they received in a very interesting way these nice marble deities, white deities of Radha Govinda. And then, when you are living in an apartment and renting, it's much better to have your own place. You don't have to move because the landlord brings up the price, and so many things are there. So the devotees understood we have to find a place, and somebody had bought some land on a hill. I think whoever came to Indonesia might have visited that hill. It's called, in Indonesia, they call hill Puncak, mountain. It means like small mountain. And it's a little bit on the outskirts of Jakarta, maybe. And it's like a very scenic place and touristic place. It's like on the weekend, everyone goes out to Puncak. So it's like extremely crowded. Anyways, in those days, that's 40 years ago, the devotees had this place, and they wanted to move the deities, which they did, but it was still very much like forest, and so they cleared one area, and then they made some kind of makeshift, a little bit like in Juhu in the beginning. Sri Radha and Bihari were not in their big temple as we see today. They were in a little hut also. And so in a similar way, I think many of our projects are like that. And the devotees made kind of a makeshift small temple with some bamboos and then covering it with plastic. And they sat outside. It was still jungle. So the devotee who was narrating those early days was telling that at nighttime we would take rest close to this little hut that we made, and before taking rest we would take some salt and we would put it all around where we were sleeping so that the snakes don't come. you know. So in villages, yeah, there are many living entities, and even we may think there are less, or there are less, but there are still living entities everywhere. Main point being that whether there's one person or many persons or no persons, we should be hearing or reciting the Srimad Bhagavatam so that the transcendental sound vibration. Actually, this year, not only are they celebrating in Indonesia, because after the deities in Mayapur of Sri Radha in Mayapur, the first deities, when I went to Indonesia, which was in the early 90s actually, after leaving India, the first deities in Indonesia were these deities of Radha Govinda. And at that temple, which is at the same location now, but now they have a beautiful temple, marble floor, looking quite big. They have a guest house. So many hundreds of devotees, many thousands, because there's a good population of devotees in Indonesia. They received their training at that temple because this was the only temple, with quite a high standard of deity worship. So this year is also they're celebrating the 50th anniversary of Srila Prabhupada visiting Indonesia. In 1973, Srila Prabhupada, I believe, was in Australia, and before coming to India, he was in two minds whether to visit or not to visit. And then one devotee I was just reading yesterday, one Mataji who had been involved with the preaching. I mean, this was like, the 73, right? Really early days. And the few devotees who had gone to Indonesia, at that time basically Jakarta, had made different arrangements with actually they have at that time, they still have, of course, some Hindu kind of organization, and they had contacted the Indian consulate as well. So when Prabhupada heard that, okay, there would be many people present, he decided to go and spend like 1 week before coming to India. And so I think they have already made or are in the process of making another short video. Actually, there are other places where in France, I was there a few months back, and they recently just had also their 50th anniversary of Srila Prabhupada installing Krishna Bhavan, and in England as well. So we are in this era of golden jubilees, which will continue actually. For that's why in our IDVM we started this almost Sri campaign year 2015, which was 1 year before 2016, which of course marked Prabhupada's 50th anniversary of registering. I mean, in 1966. The International Society for Krishna Consciousness. So these golden jubilee celebrations actually will, we have that good fortune. They will be celebrated till year 2027, because year 2027 will mark Srila Prabhupada's 50th anniversary of leaving the planet, isn't it? 1977, 2027. Yes. So it's always very interesting to hear from devotees who were in those different places in the early days where they began the the preaching activities. There was one devotee who's still there by the name of Matsya Avatar. and he was there in the very early days. And one time he was thinking, because it was difficult, new projects are generally quite austere, and not everyone can make it. So at one point he thought that I think I should not stay here. He was from Bali, where things in Bali were much more simple like that. And then he was narrating how Kavichandra Maharaj, at that time he was not knowing very much English, only he understood a little bit. And he was narrating how Maharaj just called him a big stupid person, something like that. He remembers that you should try to understand that Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and although you have made very poor arrangement for him, still he has accepted to be here, and you should know that he has some plans for Indonesia. And we had spoken to him in this manner, which had convinced him, because by profession he's architect. Actually, he's the one who actually built the temple that is there, and definitely invite the devotees to visit Bali. And this temple, we could say the original temple of having the deities of Sri Radha Govinda. So this is only of interest and possible for those who are cultivating this knowledge of Krishna consciousness, and we do that by regularly hearing from the Srimad Bhagavatam. I think we'll close here. If there's any question, we can take a few minutes after. Yes.
Sorry, every time I am only raising first. I'm only raising the first every time. Actually, this 11th canto of Bhagavatam is translated by, it's definitely not by Srila Prabhupada.
It's by disciples of Prabhupada. Yeah.
So, how do we take it? Like, because many Prabhupada disciples, they have explained words of Srila Prabhupada in little different way. Different way in the sense, for example, when you give class on Bhagavatam, your focus is more on the Varnashama side. So, somehow or other you connect every shloka. And so, how do we take it? Like, whether he is able to really express Prabhupada's mood or?
Well, because within our ISKCON society, we have senior members of the society who make certain decisions. Prabhupada, we all know, wanted that the Srimad Bhagavatam be translated and be given to the whole world, because that is especially the most important book from our Vedic collection. So they had commissioned a group of devotees, and to this day, the GBC obviously feels that what is contained there is bona fide. There are differences of opinion on possibly certain translations or certain purports that are there, and all I can say is that if such questions or reservations, which some devotees definitely do have, become of a, let's say, of a nature that warrants some kind of change, then it will be up to the members of the society who are directing the movement to bring in whatever changes need to be made. Yeah. So the point you're making is, of course, valid in the sense that within our society, and it's not only within our ISKCON society, we see this also amongst our Vaishnavacharyas. Our Vaishnavacharyas, if anyone has the opportunity to read various commentaries, we're seeing a little glimpse of it here also, is that even from a transcendental vision, one may derive a different understanding from the same statement that is being made. So that is not necessarily wrong or bad. As a matter of fact, in pretty well most cases, it illustrates how there's the whole subject matter is having various meanings or aspects which may not always be obvious to everyone, and so different personalities. In other words, persons who are on the very exalted, elevated platform of self-realization will sometimes be seeing things from a different angle. So as long as it does not go against or contradict some of the fundamental principles or tattvas or truths that are essential and basic to the philosophy of Krishna consciousness, then it's not a major problem. So therefore, we I know there are different positions on this when it comes to the remaining portion that was not translated by Srila Prabhupada, which begins, of course, from the 10th canto itself and the entire 11th and 12th cantos. So as long as it is not taken up officially as something which warrants some change, we can read such literatures, and if we find something that is questionable, that is of concern, then we can bring it up possibly to those who are in a position to comment and whatnot. Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other? Yes.
These modes of nature.
These modes of nature, yes.
Is affecting from many lifetimes.
Yes.
Even now, even after coming in contact with Prabhupada.
Yes. These modes are still there, right? They don't give up.
Is it because of lacking this sambandha abhidaya prayana? Or
Yes. These modes of material nature, as described in the Bhagavad Gita, known as they're connected with Prakriti, material nature, they are eternal principles. They are eternal realities whenever the material world is manifest, isn't it? Ishvara, Jiva, Kala, and Prakriti are eternal principles, eternal reality, and only karma is not. So, the living entity in the material world, who is, as we mentioned a few minutes ago, known or described as but the jiva condition, we are conditioned by these modes of material nature, but we can, by proper knowledge, by proper cultivation of knowledge, by proper association, surmount or overcome these modes of material nature. Because these modes of material nature are very strong, and because we have been associated with these modes of material nature since time immemorial, isn't it? Therefore, it takes a long time to actually completely sever our ties with these modes of material nature. That is all very nicely and elaborately explained, especially in the second chapter, actually, of the first canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam, entitled Divinity and Divine Service. So in that chapter, Srila Prabhupada actually quotes a series of verses whereby it explains how we can gradually rise from the lowermost to at least become situated in the mode of goodness, and then becoming firmly established in the mode of goodness, we can transcend even the mode of goodness to elevate ourselves to the mode of pure goodness, to the sattva, isn't it? So one has to become extremely determined, and it is very much, as you rightly mentioned a few seconds ago, connected with these concept of sambandha, abhideya, and prayojana. Prayojana means attaining that level. We can only attain the level of transcendence, which means developing our love for Krishna, once we totally, completely disconnect ourselves with these modes of material nature. And again, that series of verses actually begins with Srimad Swakatha Krishna Punya Sravana Kirtana Hridyanka Storya Vadrani Pidunoti Satam. By the process of hearing subject matters in relation to Krishna, then gradually, slowly, these impurities within the heart, due to our previous association with the modes of material nature, will gradually be purified, and we will rise to the mode of goodness. Prabhupada actually mentioned one time how following these 4 rules and regulations means actually means to become situated in the mode of goodness. You see, because these 4 sinful activities, which are prevalent in modern day society, are keeping people totally under these grips of the modes of material nature. So at least those who are fortunate to come in contact with this knowledge of Krishna consciousness, we take up the process of devotional service, although it's not easy and although it takes time. We have that good fortune and we have the opportunity to actually elevate ourselves gradually above these modes of material nature. And we see so many wonderful examples in our Vaishnava literatures of personalities who have been able to do this. And then when that happens, then we are, even from the very beginning, we are on our way. We're on our way out of the material world. In a similar, just like someone who is lost in the forest, and then if he finds a trail, then if he just keeps on that trail, he'll come out of the dense forest one day, like that. Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. Jai Grantharaj Bhagavatam. Jai Sri Prabhupada.